Let's look at this scenario. So there's our world, and there's two people, okay? Two well-groomed businessmen. And we're going to look at it at an instance. Let's look at taxation, the concept of taxation. Is taxation of any kind a right or a wrong? Is it morally acceptable and justifiable, or is it something that is actually a wrong? So let's look at what taxation really is. And again, we're not going to euphemize. We're going to talk about it straight on. So here's what taxation is. It's not what I believe it is. I'm getting down to the heart of the matter and describing what it actually is. Taxation is the claim that a specific group of people who call themselves government have been given a, quote, right. They've been delegated a right, okay? We've written down a law, and we say this people calling themselves the government and the IRS have a right to do this particular action, this activity, okay? This behavior. They've been given a right to confiscate, unwillingly, I might add, an arbitrarily chosen percentage of the product of another individual's labor. Now let me just start with this, right? If you ask anybody, how many are you going to voluntarily pay more taxes? Nobody will raise their hand. And you say, why not? Well, because I could barely afford to pay the ones I'm paying now, and I don't want to volunteer any more money toward that endeavor. Quite frankly, I want my resources for myself to use as I see fit voluntarily. But if the government then said, well, your taxes are going up by 5%, how many people would pay them? Most people would. Because subconsciously or consciously, they recognize they're under coercion. They're actually under duress. They're being told that if they don't give this at the command of the people who are confiscating it, that some form of violence will be conducted upon them, whether through the form of fining them and saying, we're going to take more of your resources, whether by saying, we're going to throw you in a cage and make you stay there for as long as we say you need to stay there, okay? Or by actually conducting actual physical harm upon them. So, again, we're saying that this quote-unquote right is given to individuals who call themselves government, and then they have the right to confiscate this arbitrarily chosen percentage of the product of another individual's labor. Because that's what money is, okay? Or that's what, whatever we make through what we work, that's the product of our labor. We work and then we get compensated for it. So that's an exchange for labor that we have done. That's our property, because we gave labor in return for that. So this is done whether or not the other agrees to share that product voluntarily. It's not a voluntary process. Coercion is involved. Taxation is enforced by the threat of violence, which is behavior that will result in bodily harm, or imprisonment, which is the taking away of physical freedom of movement, if those from whom the product is being seized attempt to resist this confiscation. This practice is always, quote, justified, and the word justify actually breaks down etymologically. The word justify means to create a right. That's what justify actually means. Jus in Latin means right or law. And then facere means to create or to make. So to justify means to create right, to make a right up and conjure it into existence. So it's always justified or made into a right, quote unquote, by those who claim that such a practice is necessary and required to, quote unquote, uphold the common good. This is the justification offered for the seizure of the product of people's labor involuntarily. Now, if we are honest with ourselves, if we define the concept of slavery, and I think this is a good definition for slavery, would it be fair to say slavery is the involuntary confiscation of 100% of the product of the labor of another human being? That be a fair definition? You're saying you're working, I'm going to take whatever you generate as a result of that work that you're doing. It doesn't belong to you. The product of your labor doesn't belong to you. All of it belongs to me. So you work for me. I take everything that you have been able to amass or create through the labor that you have done. I think everybody here would agree that's slavery. That's as good as a definition of slavery as you're probably going to get. I mean, we can come up with some other definitions that involve coercion and physically shackling and keeping people. But if we really are honest with ourselves, what is the purpose of slavery to begin with is to make others work for free and then take all of the product of the labor. That's what slavery was conducted for. Okay? So, if we're defining slavery as the involuntary confiscation of 100% of the product of the labor of another human being, we should be able to clearly see that there is no magical percentage to which we could lower this number that would no longer make it slavery. So I ask people, if the person who's saying I'm going to confiscate 100% of your labor and keep it for myself would say, well, I'm going to take 75%. I'll take 3/4. You can keep 1/4 of what you've created. Would that no longer constitute slavery? And I don't care what you say I'm going to use the 75% for. Okay? If you're telling somebody you have no choice, 75% of your labor belongs to me, would that no longer be slavery just because they allow them to keep 25? Okay, let's lower it to 50. Is it still slavery? Okay. Well, what percentage could it possibly be lowered to for it not to be slavery anymore? Only 0. There is no percentage that it could be lowered to for it not to constitute slavery. And again, if we're being honest with ourselves, many people want to justify this in many ways by saying, oh, it's used for services. Services which someone doesn't have a right to refuse. You know, I tell people, hey, if I said to you, I'm a computer technician. You own a computer? Okay, I'm now your computer technician. You're not allowed to refuse my services. Just think about that for a moment. You may not refuse that I am now providing the service for your computer to keep it in good shape. Okay? First of all, what have I just taken from that gentleman? Right to choose. Free will. Right there, that's slavery. I don't even have to keep going and say, hey, if you refuse, or whether you want or don't want my computer services, I'm now your technician, and I need $200 every year. I'll come over a couple of times. I don't care whether you're happy with my service or not, okay? And if you don't pay me, I'm coming and taking the computer. Now, is that really your property if you're living under that kind of duress? Or am I just a violent criminal who's saying I'm going to steal your stuff if you don't give me what I say? I'm holding you under extortion. That's duress. That's called duress. It means I am threatening violence unto the person unless they conform to my will. And that's what we're all held under. We're held under duress. All forms of taxation are duress. It is a master class telling people you have no right to refuse the arbitrarily set confiscation of your labor that I deem is going to be necessary for what I say it's necessary for. So how could you possibly claim that your home belongs to you if you're paying something called a property tax? That somebody is saying, for the services we provide in this community, you must pay us this percentage, and if you don't pay it, your house is going to be turned over to the government. And you know what that's called? There's a term for that, okay? When a society doesn't actually have true private property ownership rights, and a higher class of masters actually owns the land and owns the property and only allows the peasant class to live upon the property for as long as they pay tribute to the master class, who can tell me what system of government that is? That's called feudalism. And that's the United States government and just about every government on the earth. You live in feudalism. There's no such thing as democracy. There's certainly not a constitutional republic, that's for sure. Okay? The de facto state of government, which means indeed, in action, is feudalism. And feudalism is just another euphemism. It's a euphemism for slavery. Okay? Because slaves aren't allowed to own property. Slaves aren't allowed to keep the product of their labor. You know? That's all it really is. If we're being honest with ourselves. Once again, there's my catchphrase for this section. Okay? We want to euphemize it, justify it, call it something else. Right? I said this to that New Age woman at the UFO conference. And she said, again, I prefer not to see it that way. Well, you're not being honest with yourself. You're lying. It's called lying to yourself. That's what cognitive dissonance is. It's called lying to yourself. Okay? So, if we're being honest with ourselves, taxation is merely a euphemism for theft, violence, and slavery, the practices upon which it is actually based, and since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim ownership of the product of another's labor, such behavior can never be, quote, delegated to a group of people and called a right. Therefore, it follows logically that all forms of taxation, I don't care what they are, excise tax, property tax, gift tax, inheritance tax, income tax, I don't care what form it is, taxes on corporations even, okay? All forms of taxation are always wrong according to natural law because they are all based in the destruction of free will, they are based on coercion, and they are ultimately based upon violence, all of which are wrongdoings, all of which are forms of theft, and all of which not one individual has the right to perform upon another. And this is what people want to justify and believe can be magically turned into a right, just because they want to euphemize it and call it taxation.